Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Recovery Live. This event is brought to you by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration's Bringing Recovery Supports to Scale Technical Assistance Center strategy, otherwise known as Brass Tacks. Our TA Center is dedicated to increasing access to recovery supports, and we achieve this work through a variety of mechanisms, including a lot of technical assistance that's really focused on systems transformation and developing the capacity of peer-run recovery community and family and youth-led organizations. We are extraordinarily fortunate to have some really amazing presenters with us today, and we're going to be talking about supporting people in recovery to access and engage in education. And I'm going to turn things over to them in just a few minutes, but I've got a few housekeeping items I've got to share with everybody. So Recovery Live events are different from usual webinars. We engage here directly with the presenters and each other through the live chat box, and you're going to be answering several audience poll questions. The presenters are also going to share some of their initial thoughts, and then we'll answer questions you raised during this event. So you're going to see a lot of movement in the room, and we hope you'll find it energizing and exciting. You can also share your questions and comments throughout this event, and we really encourage that. Audience members are in a listen-only mode, but you can submit questions by typing them into the comments and questions here box. Now, if you experience any technical difficulties, please request assistance in that same box because tech support staff are standing by, they're viewing those comments, and they will respond really quickly to your needs. We also will have several resources to this topic available for download from our resource box. And to download a file, you just highlight the name of that document. The download button is going to light up in the box. You click the button, and the document will automatically be sent to your computer. Often our audience members share links to their own favorite resources in the chat box. Now, this event is being recorded, and the recording link will be shared with all the registrants after the event. You'll be able to review the chat, rewatch the presenters using that link, and access some of those resources that people have listed as well. Today's session is going to last approximately 1 hour. If, as you are listening to this content, you feel your organization may need technical assistance around this or any other topic, please copy the link for our online TA request form from the instructions box. The style of today's event is really dependent on this type of participation from all of you. You're going to see a couple of more polls up in the room today, and we're going to hope that you will participate. Now, when we close this room, a satisfaction survey is going to automatically open in your internet browser. Please, folks, take a few minutes, complete that survey. Your answers really help better serve us and you in the content that we deliver. All right, let's get into the good stuff. And before we actually jump into presentations with our cadre of experts assembled here today, I want to take just a couple of minutes with all of you to share why this particular Recovery Live topic has such important meaning to me. And as I introduce the presenters today, we're also going to hear briefly from them about the importance of this topic as well. So I'm a person in long-term recovery from substance misuse and mental health challenges, and I was diagnosed at a really young age with ADHD, and I was placed on medication. Now, I dropped out of school in the 8th grade after being exposed to drug use in school, and honestly, I just devoted myself to experimenting with drugs full-time. At 18, I obtained a GED, and I actually attempted to go to college, but I was woefully unprepared for that, and I was still actively using substances, many substances. I lasted 2 semesters before I dropped out, and I dropped out in order to support a new family. So I want to fast forward 20 years, and I was leaving prison for a nonviolent drug crime, and now I was saddled with a felony conviction. And I realized as I walked out of the gate that if I was ever going to escape poverty and addiction at this point in my life, the only way out for me was to advance my education until it really became the great equalizer to my felony conviction. So I enrolled at a small community college in the mountains of Northern California, and I resumed my effort at higher education. Now, at this time, there was no collegiate recovery support program at the school, but I was fortunate enough to land a student job in the disability support services as a computer lab tech. It was this exposure to clinicians and individuals with mental illness and other disabilities that really brought me great comfort and great support. It made me feel at home, and it provided critically important guidance and accommodations as I pursued my degree. Now, I'm proud to say I left that community college with 2 AA degrees, And then I enrolled in California State University, Chico, where I obtained a bachelor's degree and ultimately my master's degree in public administration. I can state unequivocally today that the reason it is me in front of you here today and not my competitor for this employment position 10 years ago when I applied is because I actually had the college degree. College was hugely important for me. It was the crane that helped lift me out of poverty, helped me determine that I could indeed be more than a convict and a person with an addiction, and set me on a course in my life where recovery was not only possible, it was, for perhaps the first time in my life, also highly desirable. In some ways, especially today at the height of the opioid epidemic, which frankly was my drug of choice, I owe the very fact that I'm even alive today to higher education. And with that, let me introduce each of our speakers today, and they're each going to share their own short story as well. Anna, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Anna Trevino. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I have been clean since December 6th of 2004. I'm thinking of 14. For me, I'm also in recovery for mental health. I suffer from clinical depression. And let's see. So I'm a little like Steve, where I got my GED in a correctional facility, and many, many years ago, and I'd never thought that, no one ever talked about, education or, even after high school. I mean, it was just, let's get through school and, middle school and then move forward. And so for me, whenever I first learned about collegiate recovery was when I was in a correctional treatment center, which is like prison behind bars, right? And so I learned about that, because of my therapist. She said, hey, you are from Lubbock, Texas, and let me tell you about this collegiate recovery program that they have. And for me, it was, I really didn't believe in myself and the ability to even go to get any kind of education, because I only had a GED. And so that was the first time that collegiate recovery was presented to me. And, I took the leap of faith, and I went and I applied to the Texas Tech Recovery Program. And I really agree with Steve that was this, for me, it was like, I don't think I can make it. This is not for me. I'm not welcome here, and those kinds of things. But it was so different because the collegiate recovery program loved me and embraced me and helped me to change and become the woman that I am today. And so I think that this topic is really, really important for us, to share about the education, educational resources that are in higher education, coupled with collegiate recovery programs. And also, let's see, and the support that I used when I first got to the recovery program was attending on-campus meetings at the recovery program, getting plugged into the Lubbock recovery community, traditional 12-step service work, and those types of things. So I'm really grateful also for collegiate recovery and the opportunities that they provided me. Thank you.
Kristen, can you share? You're on mute, Kristen.
I did it for all of us, right? The first mistake is leaving it on mute. So I am Kristen Harper. Hello, everybody. And the reason I was so distracted is because I see we have a friend from Ghana, which is very cool because I was just there last month doing some recovery work. But I'm a person living in long-term recovery, and I'm incredibly grateful for the life I've been given today. I have a couple of different roles. I am a recovery consultant for C4, which is how I know Melissa and Stephen. I also am the grants coordinator for a national organization called Transforming Youth Recovery, and we award collegiate recovery seed grants to schools across the country that are interested in getting something started. And I do a couple of other consulting roles, but for today's purposes, I just wanted to quickly tell you why this work has been more of a vocation and a calling to me really than just a job. So I have been in recovery since 2001, and I entered recovery at 21 after having dropped out on a medical withdrawal after a freshman year in college. That was extremely difficult, and I almost didn't make it out of that university setting with my life. And so when I encountered some community support services, and my family played a big role in that, I was able to kind of assess, what are the recovery capital elements that I'm going to need to really sustain and enhance my recovery. And at the time, I didn't know that's what they were called. I just knew that education is the great equalizer, and any kind of change, whether it's an internal personal change or a systems change, requires someone from the inside to be able to do it. And I knew degrees were going to enable me the ability to get into these systems to make the change. And so I went back to school, finished my undergraduate degree in 2004, and I taught elementary school for a couple of years, and went back and got my master's degree in a year. I was a little bit crazy that year, and was approached to start a collegiate recovery program in 2008 in South Georgia, which is where I got my start in the field. So in 2008, I was able to take my personal experience, my family's personal experience, and set up recovery support services for students on college campuses. And since then, I've just been very fortunate, had the opportunity to work at Texas Tech in their collegiate recovery setting, know Anna really well, and then joined the recovery high school world as the executive director for the Association of Recovery Schools, and have done very cool things since then. I have to say I agree completely with Anna and Stephen that the only reason why I'm here on this this presentation today is because recovery saved my life and education transformed it. And so I really have been able to not only give back to folks that are a lot like me, but also hopefully change some of the systems that have really been a barrier to us. So I'm really excited to be here and look forward to learning from my fellow presenters. Thank you.
Fantastic, Kristen. Thank you. Jeremy, can you round us out?
Certainly, I'm happy to. Thanks very much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeremy Countryman. I am the program director at the CAFE Technical Assistance Center. We're one of 5 SAMHSA-funded technical assistance centers that support mental health consumer organizations around the country. So in addition to work in some of the states where we've worked with consumer organizations, the mental health side, we also have an area of focus which is supported education, which is part of the reason for me being here today. For those of you not familiar with the term supported education, it's not unlike a more familiar term, which is supported employment you may have heard of. Essentially, supported education is a programmatic approach to providing accommodations, tools, strategies to help people in mental health recovery succeed in higher education and gain all the benefits that come with education, like Stephen alluded to when he was speaking earlier, employment, sense of purpose, sense of well-being, all of those types of things. In addition to that being our areas of focus as a technical assistance center, I do have a personal connection to this on a couple of levels. The first being, in terms of my personal story, when I was in college, more than roughly 25 years ago, I had a series of mental health challenges that were also connected with some physical health challenges. And, it's interesting coming into this work here, years later, the way it's brought home to me the fact that I wasn't aware of the types of supports that I really needed at that point in my life, and it was never made clear to me what supports were available or how I might go about asking for them. And to me, I think it's important as we approach this topic that we really work on shifting the culture around mental health and substance use recovery in higher education to make sure that when a student finds themselves in some type of crisis or needing support, they first of all feel empowered to ask for it, and second of all, know where to look. And that also applies to people whose education may have been interrupted due to something going on in their recovery, or who want to return to education later in life. I think that principle still applies. And the other thing I think that makes this personal for me is, in addition to being somebody who had these types of issues as a college student myself, I'm also the parent of 3 children, all of which have, their unique situations, including some mental health issues. So trying to help them when they're at the beginning of the process of transitioning from high school to post-secondary education, I think that's an angle that I'm encouraging all of them to consider. And one of the reasons that I think, this is an issue that concerns everybody at all no matter what stage of life they're in, whether you're a student looking at college, whether you're somebody who's looking at returning to education later in life, or whether you're a parent, this is an issue that is deserving of attention and thought before you start engaging with those higher education systems. Thanks very much.
Fantastic, Jeremy, and thanks to all 3 of you. We're gonna be right back with the full-on presentations. I've got one final piece to address before I turn this over to the presenters. As everybody was coming in today, there was a poll up in the room. I just want to go over that really quickly and report out a little bit. It's lovely to see that we've got a bunch of folks, people in recovery here, about 37%. There's several full-time college students. I'm really excited to see that. Some part-time college students. It's fantastic. It's a bummer that we don't see anybody from an actual collegiate recovery program, but that's why we're here. We're gonna work to change all that. We've got some education administrators on the line with us, some education advisors. We've got a cadre of clinicians and caseworkers. That's fantastic. I always love to see program directors and CEOs in Recovery Live events because there's so much information here. A nice little grouping of policymakers, a number of educators, and then a whole bunch of folks, about 36 folks who just kind of logged in as others. So really excited to get us underway. And with that, Anna, would you like to kick off the presentations and take us away?
All right, thank you so much. So starting the conversation about higher ed, continuing education. So here's just a few definitions, of course, and a little bit of explaining that. So high school, post-secondary, 2- and 4-year, colleges, any kind of technical or trade schools. So I think what we look at is, where do these people learn about continuing education? Where do they get, plugged in with any kind of resources, after high school or in high school, which Kristen will talk a little bit more about that. But so points of engagement, where just like for me, it was being exposed in that correctional facility, right? So any kind of mental health and substance use disorder treatment, I think that it's a team approach where as soon as, me being a clinician, as soon as I began to work with any client at residential treatment, outpatient treatment, anything like that, I feel like it's really important to, start talking about that, whether if it's just dropping the information and saying, hey, you know what do you want to do after this? Have you been to school before? Have you not? What are your thoughts about that? There may be some fear of even attempting to return to school or even thinking about going to school for the first time. And so being introduced to that in early recovery, I think, will plant that seed, looking at, small recovery groups or youth programs, high school therapists, anything like that. Incarceration is important. And I'll share a little bit more about kind of what a program that we created at Texas Tech and how we reach out to various, agencies and institutions and all that. The other thing is, you know, in sober living. You know, these individuals are excited about their future and what's going to come, you know, what's next and what can I accomplish and anything like that. And so the peer recovery support system there is helpful to say, hey, you know, especially if you have a collegiate recovery program in your city or in not, you know, and just mentioning that. So anyway, I'm going to move to the next slide. And so one of the things that that we do here at Texas Tech is we created the Power Committee, and now it's a student organization. And so what we basically do is we go out and we, you know, the students are the ones that are in the collegiate recovery program at Texas Tech are the ones that do the outreach. I'll go out every now and then. Some of the other staff will go out as well. But I think there's so much more power in a student in the collegiate recovery program to go out and to share about their experiences and being a part of a collegiate recovery program and saying, hey, I'm the example. I'm the real life example. And these are all the resources that I've been able to get, you know, at this program in higher education. You know, when I meet with a student, when I first meet with a potential student, let's say that, and they come in, or if I'm doing a presentation somewhere, and I talked about this before, when I meet them for the first time, we want to talk about what are your goals? What is it that you want to accomplish? Because a four-year university is not for everyone, you know. And you know, some individuals want to go and get a mechanic certification. They want to become a medical assistant, you know, and do a trade or get a trade or stay in the community college and become a dental assistant. You know, that is totally fine. I think it's up to the individual what they want to accomplish. Let's look at the goals. But it's, you know, it's my privilege and my job that and my passion to let them know, hey, you know, there is an opportunity in higher education. We believe in you. We trust that you can come here, and then tell them more so about all the resources that Texas Tech offers or any higher education setting. And the other thing is helping them with the application processes, right? So the Texas Tech application, the center application, and the FAFSA, which is like the financial aid deal, helping them with all that, I think is really important. So anyway, thank you so much for my time, and I really appreciate being here, and thank you so much.
Fantastic, Anna. Thank you for that. And let me turn this over to Kristen. Kristen, let's hear from you.
Thanks, Stephen. Hey, everybody. I am, again, really glad to be here and just wanted to touch on a few things in relation to secondary and post-secondary support. This slide here, you'll see this is kind of the traditional sort of approach to primary prevention, and then also a few just kind of topics for intervention, and then what we're starting to see now both at the high school and college levels is recovery support. So what's important about this is that we are learning now that it really takes more of a comprehensive approach to help folks that are transitioning from high school to college or into trade school or community colleges, etc. So Recovery High School, there's about 40 across the country. There's a really great organization. Of course, I'm biased because I used to be part of it, called the Association of Recovery Schools. If you want some really good information on Recovery High Schools, there's a variety of types and models ranging from charter schools to schools within schools and public school districts, private schools, etc. But the primary purpose of these schools are to support students that are in recovery from substance use disorder, co-occurring issues, as well as award state recognized diplomas. So you can check out some of the outcomes from these programs at the ARS website, which is listed below here on the slide. Collegiate recovery has been around for about the past 35 years as far as we've been able to track. This is just a quick little snapshot of sort of where we have evolved to. In 2008, when I started the Collegiate Recovery Program here in South Georgia, there were 11 programs that we were aware of across the country. Now we're tracking over 215 schools that have some level of recovery support services for students. And this includes community colleges and four-year universities. If you would like to see if you have local resources near you, then I suggest you check out the link below at facingaddiction.org, the resource hub, and go to recovery support in school settings. So within these 215, 220 or so universities and community colleges, you have a variety of options. We like to, at CYR, we like to call it sort of the menu of recovery support services in post-secondary settings. And so you have sort of this community approach where there's a very big focus on peer support, other students that are in recovery that are there. There potentially is a space available on campus. You see an evolution into programming. Maybe there's one full-time staff or multiple full-time staff. There might be a graduate student. But there is some kind of programming very similar to what Anna touched on, what they're doing at Texas Tech, that allows recovery students to not only support themselves but also receive some kind of academic advisement, career planning, some sort of additional ancillary support in relation to their academic goals, which are always going to enhance the recovery outcomes. We also have started to see the evolution of young adult intensive outpatient programs. These are actually not considered collegiate recovery programs, but they are a really helpful community asset that you may find near or sometimes even on college campuses. So check those out as well. Some other options are treatment educational programs, transitional housing, recovery housing. We know that housing can be an issue for a lot of us that are looking for safe housing while we go back to school. So those are also available as well. And I'm at 11. So let's go over the second poll. It looks like, let's see, the question is, how does your organization support people in recovery who may wish to continue education? And it looks like most of you guys have listed some GED services, and I think that these are all really important services. The poll information, it's still ongoing. I think Melissa's going to leave it open for a little bit, but you know, one of the things that's really important to remember about this is the research for collegiate recovery that's coming out of right now, folks like Alexandra Lade and some other, you know, Brown and Ashford and some of the other researchers that have really taken an interest in collegiate recovery, showing that the most important piece of collegiate recovery is the connection to peers. And so whatever support services you're listing here on the poll, just kind of keep in mind that having that connective piece, that peer support piece, really is what's the glue that holds these communities together. And I'll turn it back over to Stephen.
All right, Kristen, that was great, and thank you. Jeremy, take us home.
I got to remember to turn that mute button off. That's always important. So I'm the second person to do that. Okay, well, there's a lot of stuff here in these few slides, and I'm going to run through it, and obviously we'll have a bit of time to talk about it if there are any questions. But one of the important things to consider when you're first looking at higher education is that there's a very distinct difference between the way the higher education system operates in terms of your legal right to accommodations versus post-secondary. So when you're in a K through 12 system, you know, there's the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act that is really the governing law for what a public school is required to provide you. Whereas in higher education, it's really only the ADA and the Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which is the guiding legislation that determines what an institution of higher education is required to do. The standard in the K through 12 side is something called a free and accessible public education. You may see that acronym FAPE in reference to you know, K through 12 and that environment. That's not a standard that exists in higher education. So a lot of the law that it surrounds what universities and colleges are required to do is more geared towards physical access. So when you get into some of those areas where you're dealing with what you might call invisible disabilities, including mental health and substance use related issues, the law is a lot less clear. So of course in the K through 12 side, because you have a much stronger legal framework, the accommodations are a requirement. You know, there's something called an individual education plan that is a legal document that the school and the students' legal guardians have to come to an agreement on, and lists the accommodations that are going to be delivered. On the higher education side, that's not something that exists. And then, so of course, and this is sort of a theme of looking at these two sides of the ledger in terms of your educational progression, if you will. When you move from your K through 12 education system to your higher education system, be it your traditional university, your community college, your technical school, what have you, the onus and the responsibility for getting the types of supports and accommodations a student needs really shifts from the institution to the student in a very significant way. And that can be a challenge for a student to take on when they're moving into a higher education environment, but it's something they need to be aware of. Of course, the other big difference there you see at the bottom of the slide is when you're in the K through 12 system, the parents and guardians are doing a lot of the work. There's this whole issue in higher education where, and this is particularly an issue with your traditional four-year institutions, where the university in some sense operates in loco parentis, in other words, in the place of the parent. For example, if you have a traditional four-year school that's residential and the student's living in a dorm, those decisions about you know, whether a student needs a leave of absence, the conditions under which they can return, that whole area is something that the university takes responsibility for, and we could do a whole other presentation on that very issue, because this is a problem for universities in trying to determine what accommodations to offer and when and if and how to allow students to participate or allow them to return to campus. So that can be a sticky area that you don't have to deal with on the K through 12 side at all. So one of the other points, I think I mentioned this in my comments at the beginning, is that when you look at your traditional four-year school, they're unique in the sense that, especially if they're, you know, your typical residential college that you might think of, each one has its own unique freestanding culture. If you sort of think about the way we in the United States think about mental health and recovery and what your average person on the street might say about mental health or mental illness or what their suppositions are about the entire area, there's kind of, you have an ability to say, hey, if I polled most people in the public, this is what they think. When you look at colleges and universities, each one sort of has its own unique culture. Some will be more recovery friendly than others. Some will deal more directly with the issue than others. And one of the challenges, if you're somebody who's looking at either starting out in a university or any other type of school, or if you're somebody who's looking at returning, is you kind of have to determine how recovery friendly a campus culture is before you engage with it. It's really an issue of, if you will, sort of being an educated consumer of the education services that are being offered. And recognizing that, you know, one thing you got to consider is what's going on academically. Do they have the program I want to take? You know, is this something that's accredited? Do they have a good academic reputation? But you also have to consider, you know, how does that campus culture and environment support my recovery? What's available there to do that? Is it something that's discussed openly on that campus? What services are available? Is there a counseling center? Is there a disability services office that's willing to accommodate mental health and substance use issues? Those types of questions. So if you look at that third bullet there, kind of when you're shopping around, if you will, a quality campus culture, you'll see that recovery is not just something that's being addressed in a small niche where there's just, you know, for example, a sober living area, or there's just one or two organizations on campus that deal with it. It'll be something where you have buy-in all the way from the administration down to the people who are, you know, the RAs in the dorms, or, you know, people who are running the orientation. A quality campus culture, you'll have every level from the highest, the president of the university, all the way down to the faculty, the campus security, the residences, will have an awareness of what recovery is, how to direct students to access the services that are available on campus, and will be open to helping make that happen. Sort of have a no wrong door policy, if you will. I got to find the right mouse here so I can advance this. There we go. So if you look now, one of the things that I think is true for people in recovery is that sometimes, and I think Anna mentioned this at the top, that your traditional four-year school might not be a great fit for everybody. You are away from home, you're living on campus, you're part of this culture where there are a lot of expectations about how you're going to be spending your time. If you're a person in substance use recovery, there might be, substance use on the campus that you don't feel comfortable being around. Similarly, if you're a returning student later in life who is looking to sort of advance in their career, but you're not the sort of typical student who's in that 18 to 21 age who wants to live on a campus, you might be looking at some kind of non-traditional options, like, community college, technical school, what have you. And one of the big differences there is that, whereas in a traditional four-year school, you can kind of look around and say, hey, this campus is really recovery friendly and they have everything I need. I can almost get it here in one place and it be self-contained. You don't have that kind of experience if you're engaged in a community college or a technical school or something that's what you might call non-traditional. You don't have that same level of immersion in a recovery-friendly campus culture that you might be able to find if you find the right fit at your traditional four-year school. So I think that one of the challenges to make the entire education system more recovery-friendly is to help move some of those advancements that we've seen in the last decade or so at some of your traditional four-year schools, where they've become more cognizant of supporting recovery, and see if we can help disseminate that type of culture shift to community colleges and other non-traditional higher education environments. So if you look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of going your sort of non-traditional route, obviously one of the things that's a real help is you can kind of set your own pace if you're a person in a recovery in a community college or a non-traditional campus environment. But sort of the other side of that coin, if you will, is that while you might have more flexibility in that type of environment, you're not going to have the ready-made network of services and supports that you might find in your traditional four-year school. So in addition to having that, as I was saying earlier, you have that layer of responsibility moving from secondary education to post-secondary just because you don't have the same set of legal frameworks there to provide accommodations. If you're looking at a community college or a technical school or other non-traditional option versus your traditional four-year school, then you have a whole other layer of sort of needing to take additional responsibility for making sure your supports and services are in place. So as you can see there, the third bullet point, there's really a trade-off there. A student has to kind of put together their own network of supports and services and accommodations on their own if they're going to go that non-traditional route. And so those four boxes there are just kind of some of the basic things I think you need to consider if you're going that route. First of all, knowing yourself, obviously, having a good understanding of where you are in your recovery and what you need is essential. Know your school. What is that campus or school environment you're entering have available? Find out as much as you can about that ahead of time. You don't want to be in a situation where you're like, oh, I've been here for a semester and I've suddenly realized they don't have any of the things that would really be helpful for me. Know your accommodations. If you're somebody who is, in that transition age and you are somebody who had accommodations when you're in the high school level, you might be able to actually take that list of accommodations you had in your IEP in high school and say, hey, Campus Disability Services Office or faculty member or advisor, this is what helped me in high school. How can I translate this to this higher education environment? And of course, know your resources. This is important, especially if you're going that non-traditional route, because you're going to have to put together the resources that you can get from that institution with the ones that are in that surrounding community. So, you know, being connected with whatever kind of peer support organization, whatever provider is in that area, you know, other organizations that can help you identify resources you need for daily living. Putting all that together ahead of time is really essential. The last thing I wanted to mention here on this final slide, which I think is an important point, is that, you know, I've kind of built up some layers here. It's like it's harder to go to school than it is to go to college than it is to high school. It's probably more difficult if you're trying to put this network together yourself than if you are entering a four-year school where they have everything you need in one place. Additionally, as some of the research that I've done, which actually coincidentally came from Brass Tacks when I was putting a presentation together last year, there are certain groups that can have an especially difficult time navigating higher education. This slide just mentions some of them. Students transitioning from youth serving systems, so that would be situations like foster care, students of color, returning veterans, students that represent the LGBTQ population, first-generation college students, students that are trying to enter higher education that have a criminal justice history. These are all factors that can layer on an additional level of complication, if you will. And I think it's important to, you know, depending on what side of this equation you're on, if you're a student who is representative of one of these populations, you need to make sure that you look for resources that are specific to your own personal history. If you are somebody who's operating a program, a college administrator, somebody operating a recovery program that's trying to encourage people to participate in higher education, you need to think about these groups and what kind of services and supports you have that are specifically directed towards the unique issues that some of these groups have. And we don't have enough time to go through all of them and what each of their challenges are, but if that's something you're interested in pursuing, I would encourage you to go check that out. So I guess just in summation, you know, I think it's definitely true that for people in recovery, some of these non-traditional paths can be really beneficial. You know, they offer the type of flexibility that can make a difference and can kind of get you through the door a little more easily than that high bar of entry that you might experience trying to live on campus in a traditional four-year college or university. On the other side of that ledger, of course, some of those non-traditional institutions, they have fewer resources, and really, if you look at the research, the types of students that are served by community colleges and similar institutions tend to have a higher degree of need. So there's a necessity to find a way to fill that gap between the degree of need in those student populations and the amount of resources that are available to them. And I think that's where some of the people in the recovery community out there have an opportunity to step into that area and help fill that gap. Thank you.
Wow, Jeremy, that was chock full of information, and I mean, it was really great. All three of you folks, thank you. These were fantastic presentations, and you know, just a ton of information, and it really shows because there's a bunch of questions that have come. So I'm going to jump into these questions really quickly, and we'll try to get through as many of them as we can. The first one I thought was really interesting. How do mental health providers engage higher education institutions for partnerships to bridge recovery programs for the community where none currently exists? And I'm just opening that up to all three of you as presenters. Thoughts?
Oh, well,
yeah, I can jump in there. That's fine. So in building those kind of critical relationships within the community, it does really help to know what your assets are first. And so if you're aware of the liaisons that you may want to contact on campus, probably within the Student Services Department, counseling centers, those folks that really act as the gatekeepers for a lot of student assistance needs. then I would reach out to those folks directly. I will tell you that on the university side, having worked at several universities and working with, a lot of universities now, there is some restrictions on how and if they can establish partnerships, official partnerships. So you may just want to approach it as just let them know you are a resource, that you are aware of the need for recovery support services for mental health and for substance use disorder, and just inform them about what your practices are. And then I'll let the rest of my colleagues here answer as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Kristen. It can be hard to sort of go the official partnership route because of some of the bureaucratic reasons. I think a good place to start is the counseling center or the disability services office at a given institution that you're interested in partnering with would be a good place to start. But it's really essential that you establish that relationship with the person in that campus community that's sort of going to be your champion. As opposed to saying, I'm going to go to the top and do some kind of presentation about who we are and what we do. Find that person in either the counseling office, the disability services office, or maybe a campus mental health or suicide prevention group, maybe a faculty member who's interested in this area or has some kind of recovery history, and start with that one champion that you can find on campus to start building the bridge from there. That would be kind of where I would go.
Fantastic. Anna, any final comment on any of that?
No, I think they summed it up.
Fantastic. All right. Another question. If the ADA and 504 apply, why aren't accommodations required in higher education?
Well, I know Jeremy's probably got a lot more experience, and Anna, I know from the clinical standpoint, you definitely have more experience than I do with that. But I will say, just as a coordinator of collegiate recovery, working with students setting up those services, we actually did find that recovery is covered under the ADA. But the problem is that you have to prove that the student is in recovery. And for us, that normally looks like having a doctor or the treatment center, the counselor that saw the student write a letter and submit it to the disabilities office. And at that point, we worked directly on a case-by-case basis with the disabilities office directors to establish what types of accommodations the students needed. Usually that meant priority registration, because recovery students are very similar to athletes and students that are also to recover from mental health, not just substance use disorder. So there's a lot of various time management issues for our students, right? So they have potentially their recovery meetings they're going to. They might also be seeing a therapist. There may be some additional kind of alternative events that are very critical to their recovery, like faith-based participation, those sorts of things. And so we worked and explained with our disabilities office, why we needed to have that primary or that priority registration. In the high school world, the 504 IDEA has actually come up several times as needing to be revised to include substance use disorder and additional mental health language in it. So I actually have found university and the higher ed world to be a little bit easier to navigate when it comes to accommodations. Secondary education has been a bit more challenging because most of the counselors in secondary education, therapists or professionals don't want to provide a diagnosis of substance use disorder to adolescents, which would open up the conversation for more accommodations. So it's a little bit stickier in that world. So I'll touch it and allow Anna and Jeremy to jump in there.
Yeah, so for our, for my experience is just like Kristen's. We're working really close with the student disability office here, and then even we have an autism center, the Burkhart Center, so working with them, and that we really necessarily don't give them, it's up to give them like the student information, but it's up to the student to say, hey, this is what I need. Can you support me, and how do I navigate my way through this? And so that's what we've normally seen, and they have been really, really open and accommodating to all of our students. And of course, like Kristen talked about, having a priority registration. So that's like a win-win for our students.
Yeah, I think that's those are all very good points. it really becomes more of an issue of individual advocacy in the college level, I find. So, the difference is if you have in the K through 12 system, you have this document and you have this sort of legal standard. When you get to the higher education system, the ADA and the Rehabilitation Act do entitle you to the accommodations, and you can make an argument to that effect, but the enforcement mechanisms aren't as strong. And also because of the nature of higher education, the fact that individual departments and faculty members have a lot more control and latitude in terms of how they run their classes, you often see a student will have to sort of make appeals to individual professors or departments, whereas, in your K through 12 system, there's that floor there, like this is what I get and it's here in this legal document, and there's sort of no arguing at that point.
I think it's the difference between in higher ed, it's easier to get through the door for accommodations, but the actual execution of the accommodations is a little bit more challenging because of all the reasons Jeremy just listed. In the secondary education world, it's more difficult for substance use disorder, especially, to even get into the door. But if you can get it in, then certainly the enforceability is much clearer.
Wow, that's just a lot to take in. There's a lot around this. And in that vein, we're going a little tangential here, but we know that for the most part, collegiate recovery and recovery high school programs are traditionally substance use disorder oriented. Are there programs that look at both SUD and mental illness? And if so, can you guys talk a little bit about them?
Yeah, so I'll go first again. You guys can tell I like to talk.
Please do.
So I will say, somebody mentioned in the chat box, just to kind of compartmentalize this just a little bit, there is another really helpful program called TRIO that if you're not aware of, I suggest that you look them up and see if you have access to a TRIO program on your campus or in your area. And they have done some really cool stuff. Brass Tacks has done some work with TRIO in collaboration with Collegiate Recovery, and so I just want to say that's also a resource as well. I think that it would be fair to say, and Anna can speak to the specifics of what she's hearing, because Texas Tech is kind of one of the biggest models in the country, but I would say from the Transforming Youth Recovery standpoint, we're beginning to see more and more of an inclusive model when it comes to mental health being not the primary focus for collegiate recovery, but definitely a factor of what types of services and programming are being provided by collegiate recovery professionals. And so you will see, if you just imagine walking into a collegiate recovery setting, if they're fortunate enough to actually have a space on campus, you may also encounter some folks that are in recovery from eating disorders or from self-harm or some of the other process addictions. You may also see some folks that are, their family of origin has addiction throughout their family history. And so it's not just people that are in primary substance use disorder recovery, but you're starting to see kind of the larger culture of the campus be impacted by this idea of the principles behind recovery, of like a holistic wellness.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, Kristen, that was great. Absolutely, that's what we're seeing. I don't really know like the of it. Kristen's probably can give you some stats on that, but we are seeing more students come out and be honest about mental health, and any kind of struggles they're having with process addictions or, some disordered eating. In the very beginning, it would just be substance use disorder, but then as they start to grow in their recovery, this starts, popping up or whatever. And so I can share about, being an alumni of Texas Tech, of the program here. that was something for me as far as being a person in recovery, being a part of a collegiate recovery program, and not, you know, I had 10 years of recovery, and then I had it was just untreated depression, and so being open and honest about that. And so our students, they'll come out and they'll talk about, the struggle that's going on with their mental health. And, we make the appropriate referrals and recommendations, and, we talk about any kind of follow-ups and anything like that. But yeah, it's becoming more, inclusive, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think you are starting to see them grow together a little bit more. I think if you look historically on the substance use side, the sort of sober living options and those types of programs are where that has sort of originated. If you look at the mental health side, a lot of the conversation around mental health in terms of campus groups has grown out of two things, I would say. One, a focus on suicide and suicide prevention. The other, the whole issue of, leaves of absence and that sort of somewhat amorphous campus safety conversation. But, I think it's really at the end of the day, even though they've kind of come at this from different angles, they're very much intertwined, and I think Anna and Kristen both alluded to this really, is that oftentimes these issues are very much co-occurring, so the focus on wellness and sort of the focus on creating more of a trauma-informed environment, regardless of what door you come in, whether you come in the substance use door or whether you come in the mental health door, trying to make sure that the campus's response, the institution's response to those types of issues is trauma-informed is really where those two things intersect in my mind.
That's fantastic, folks. And Julie, thank you. That kind of sums up the final question that we had. Folks, there are a number of really great questions that I would love to pose to the presenters today. And what we can do is, for those of you who have submitted questions, if you'd like a response, we would be happy to respond by email. And if you could just let Melissa Witham know, just let us know in the chat that you're interested in getting a response, we'd be happy to do that. I just want to say in closing, we're really glad that so many of you could come today. And as I mentioned earlier, education for me was a great equalizer, brought me not only out of poverty, but into recovery and into the larger community in a really positive way as well. This is one of the most important topics I think we've covered in terms of delivering hope, that those of us with substance use or mental disorders can overcome all things and go on to achieve great success with just a little support and understanding as we kind of pursue our education degree. A link to a satisfaction survey is going to pop up when we close this online meeting room. It'll take you less than 3 minutes to complete. Please give us the feedback, good, bad, and ugly. Your comments and suggestions will improve our future Recovery Live events. If you've got additional questions, put them in the satisfaction survey. And also, please consider reaching out for technical assistance from Brass Tacks at any time. Just click that big blue button on the Brass Tacks webpage that says Request TA. Someone from our team will be in touch shortly. And I remember that there's going to be that satisfaction survey popping up as soon as we end. Thank you all for joining today's session. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And thank you to the presenters. Bye-bye all.